terms of hybrids, my favorite large flowering hybrid is the President. My friend Don Schulte, who does the note cards I bring with me, many of which are photographed in my garden, we've had a number of conversations about this plant and why we cannot get the color right. And we've come to the conclusion that the reason we can't get the color right, whether we're using digital or traditional film, is every camera comes with a built-in UV filter. And this flower is so purple, it's throwing off a lot of UV light, which is messing with the camera's filter. Don's solution was to photograph it from underneath. This does not even begin to capture the intensity of the purple, the richness of it. Many of the large flowering hybrids will bloom a second time during the season. Usually the flowers are a bit smaller and it's less floriferous. During the first bloom cycle, this thing gets flowers this big. They are just to die for. That's what he looks like. Never fails me. This is my fence. And those are my peonies. No, I have not buried all my plants. They just decompose.
So quirky, I think.
Hey, you know, I do have a couple cats buried out there. And I love, this is just after the sepals have dropped. And it has the same color here as in the peonies, some of the peonies that I have nearby. I planned that, really, I did. If you want to have a thug clematis, this is the thug clematis. What are thugs in the garden? Thugs are plants that you can't control. Now, clematis have these fluffy seed heads. And if they have fluffy seed heads, how are the seeds being dispersed? Wind. Anyone here control the wind? No one. Damn. Keep hoping to find somebody who can control the wind. You can't control the wind, you can't control where the seed is going. And I started, when I realized what was going on in my yard with this plant, I started looking at my neighbors' yards, and guess what I found? This plant. And I helped remove it because it's my responsibility. What I find mystifying about this plant in our gardens here in the United States, and especially this part of the United States, is we have a native clematis called Clematis virginiana, or Virgin's Bower, that blooms a little earlier in the season. It has small, white, star-shaped flowers that look exactly the same. It actually has more, I think, more beautiful seed heads that persist through the winter. So I wonder, why are we growing this exotic, which turns out to be invasive, when you have a wonderful plant that is the same size, blooms the same time roughly, same color, same flower size, everything, you know, except it's not exotic and invasive. So if you want the real thing, go for Clematis virginiana. That's the one you want. 20 to 25 feet. It will fill the same space in your garden quite happily.
Is that the one you have on the garage roof?
No, that's the Montana. But the Montana is not invasive. I've never found a baby from that one. It's just big. Invasiveness doesn't mean it's a big plant. Invasiveness means it's reproducing at the expense of the local flora. The most pernicious form of pollution is an invasive plant or animal. If I throw a piece of paper on the sidewalk, that piece of paper isn't going to reproduce. Someone else may come along and think that's a good place to throw their piece of paper, but that doesn't mean it's reproduced. Okay? 13 pairs of starlings were introduced to Central Park, New York in the 19th century by someone who thought it would be a charming idea, an utterly charming idea, to have all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare in the New World. And now we have flocks of millions of individuals of a very, very successful species, because this is a group of birds. I don't know that the European starling does this, but other starlings do. They are communal nesters. That means, hey, I'll watch your baby while you get food. They're very successful. Australia has the same problem. I guess someone had the bright idea twice. And the problem here is they are competing with our native birds for nesting locations. I can remember when I lived in New Jersey years and years ago. Yes, I was born in New Jersey. I admit it freely. It's the Garden Street. We had an old oak tree, half dead, in our backyard, and we had a flicker nesting. And the starlings drove it out. This is what they do. They are highly competitive and very successful. There was a survey done by some people who disputed the issues about the collapse of native bird species and said, oh, there's at least as many birds as there were when we came here. Yeah, there are. And most of them are European starlings and European sparrows and rock pigeons, which rock pigeons are not a problem because they don't actually directly compete and they don't rob nests. They're going for different food sources. So the most pernicious form of pollution is introducing a breeding population. And once you've introduced that breeding population, whether it's a plant or an animal, you can't control it. You see this with Phragmites, you see this with purple loosestrife, you see this with the zebra mussel, you see this with the Asian carp, the leaping Asian carp. Other climbers, Hydrangea anomalous subspecies petiolaris. Yes, I practiced these names in front of my mirror in the bathroom. This is climbing hydrangea. It's a big plant when it matures, up to 50 feet in height, indeterminate width. What does that mean when it's indeterminate? It goes, it just goes. Okay, but it's not crazy. It's not an invasive plant, it's a big plant. Okay, there's a difference. And invasiveness is a characteristic which is only ascribed to exotic plants. Now, exotic doesn't mean it's really cool and different. Exotic means it's not native, it's not indigenous. California poppy is not native here, it's an exotic plant. Phragmites is an exotic plant. We used to have a Phragmites that was native here, but the one we're dealing with is not the native. In fact, the native species is probably extinct. There are exotic plants that are not invasive. A native plant cannot be invasive. It's supposed to be here, it's supposed to be successful. It may be aggressive, but it is not invasive. Slow to start, but inexorable in its progress. So oftentimes I'll have people ask me, well, my climbing hydrangea, it hasn't flowered yet. And I always ask, how long have you had it? And inevitably the question is usually less than 5 years. It's like, give it a little more time. Plants, okay, there is only one species I know of that will bear young when it can't afford it. Plants do not bear young if they can't afford it. Making a baby is the most exhausting process an organism goes through, and flowering and bearing fruit is making a baby. And if a plant does not have the energy to do that, it will not do that. Perennial plants, their life strategy is I'm going to flower fruit once a year, and I'm going to spend the rest of the year storing up energy to do it again next year to ensure the perpetuation of my kind. The only time that they might violate this rule is if they are sufficiently stressed. As a last-ditch effort, they may fruit and flower prolifically because they have been triggered by imminent death. We see this in our ash trees. They will flower and fruit before they die. An effort to keep the species going. That is the strategy.